My parents asked me to be a surrogate for my sister. When I said no, my father sneered, "You've always been a disappointment. Your only value to this family is your womb." Then my lawyer called. Suddenly the entire family was on their knees begging for. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My name is Rachel, and this is the story of how my own family was willing to sacrifice my life for my sister's dream. It all started long before the big, dramatic events. It started in the quiet, everyday moments of my childhood. I never imagined I would be sharing this, but after everything that's happened, I need an outside perspective. It began with a phone call, a call that came after 13 years of near silence from my parents. My husband, Walter, was on edge. He said something felt off, but neither of us could have ever predicted what was coming. To understand, you have to know about my sister, Blair. She's 4 years older than me, and she has always been the family's golden child. As kids, it was painfully obvious that she was everything my parents had ever wanted. She was smart, athletic, beautiful, seemingly flawless. They'd praise her constantly, calling her their perfect princess or their golden apple. Then there was me. I was the surprise, the unplanned second child. And being unplanned wasn't my only sin in their eyes. I was born premature with a severe heart condition. My early years were a blur of hospitals, surgeries, and constant medical care. My grandparents, God bless them, paid for most of the bills that insurance didn't cover, but my parents never let me forget what a financial burden I was. The comments were never direct accusations, always passive-aggressive jabs that slid under my skin like tiny shards of glass. We could have taken that vacation to Florida if it weren't for all these medical bills, my mother would sigh while flipping through a magazine. Or my father would say, Blair's college fund would be a lot bigger if we didn't have to deal with your hospital stays. The contrast in how they treated us was stark and cruel. My small achievements were barely acknowledged, while Blair's minor victories were celebrated with parties and expensive gifts. I remember in high school, I won a statewide writing competition. I was so proud. The award ceremony was on a Tuesday evening. My parents couldn't make it. Blair had a regular soccer practice that day. A practice. Not even a game. And that was that. No discussion. But it wasn't just the big events. It was the little things, the daily things, that really drove the message home. Blair knew she was the golden child, and she used it to her full advantage. She would bully me, knowing our parents would never take my side. I'll never forget the day I turned 12. I was walking upstairs, and Blair's science project, a ridiculous-looking volcano made of papier-mâché, was sitting on the landing. I accidentally brushed against it with my elbow. It wobbled, but it didn't fall. Blair saw it from her room. She stormed out, her face red with rage. "You clumsy idiot," she screamed, and she shoved me. Hard. I lost my balance and tumbled down half a flight of stairs. I landed in a heap at the bottom, the air knocked out of me. A huge, ugly bruise bloomed on my back that week, a deep purple and green monstrosity that hurt every time I moved. When I tearfully told my mother what happened, she barely looked up from her crossword puzzle. Her response? "Well, Rachel, you should be more careful around Blair's things." That was it. No concern for my pain, no punishment for Blair. Just another reminder that I was less valuable than her sister's possessions. My only escape was school, but even that was a struggle. My health problems meant I missed a lot of class. While Blair was getting straight A's and breaking records on the soccer field, I was fighting to maintain mediocre grades between hospital stays. The comparisons were constant. Why can't you be more like Blair? Blair never struggles with her homework. Blair doesn't cause us all this anxiety. By the time I reached my senior year, I had perfected the art of being invisible. It was just easier that way. The real turning point in my life, the moment the light finally broke through the clouds, was leaving for college. I begged my grandparents to help me go as far away from home as possible. They were the only ones who had ever truly been on my side, who saw the toxic dynamic for what it was. They generously helped with my tuition, and I chose a university several states away. Leaving home felt like taking my first full, deep breath after years of being suffocated. The first few months were strange. I remember walking around campus, just watching other people, feeling like a ghost. I'd sit alone in the cafeteria, not knowing how to start a conversation. I was so used to being invisible that I didn't know how to be seen. I spent a lot of time in the library, losing myself in books. It was my safe space. And then, I met Walter. It was in a sophomore literature class. He sat next to me. He wasn't loud or flashy, he was quiet, kind, and had this calm, steady presence. He asked to borrow a pen one day, and we started talking. He asked about me, not as a point of comparison to someone else, but about me. He was patient and compassionate. When I eventually told him about my heart condition, he didn't flinch or treat me like I was fragile. He just listened. For the first time in my life, I felt seen and valued for who I was. Our first date was simple. We went to a little diner off campus. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He told me about his family, a loud, loving bunch who lived a couple of hours away. He made me laugh, a real, genuine laugh that I didn't realize I had been holding back. We got married a year after graduation. It was a small ceremony. I sent an invitation to my parents and Blair, of course. They didn't come. They didn't even send a card. I can't say I was surprised, but it still stung. A part of you, the little girl inside, always hopes they'll finally show up. But Walter's family was there, and they embraced me as one of their own. His mother, a wonderful woman named Diane, took me wedding dress shopping. We spent a whole Saturday going from store to store. She cried when I found the one. It was a simple, elegant dress, and when I looked in the mirror, she stood behind me, beaming. "Oh, Rachel," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you look so beautiful." That was a moment I had always dreamed of sharing with my own mother. In a way, Diane gave me that. Walter and I built a life together. A quiet, happy life. He got a good job as an engineer, and I worked part-time at a local bookstore. We bought a small house with a little garden in the back. It was our sanctuary, a world away from the judgment and neglect of my past. A few years into our marriage, Walter and I decided we wanted to start a family. This was a huge decision for us. Because of my heart condition, my doctors had always been very clear that pregnancy would be incredibly high risk. We met with my cardiologist, a kind man who had known me for years. He laid out the facts. The strain on my heart could be catastrophic. He didn't say I couldn't do it, but he advised strongly against it. Walter and I talked about it for weeks. We discussed adoption, other options. But there was a deep-seated desire in both of us to try. I wanted to experience it, to feel that connection. We knew the risks, and we decided to face them together. The pregnancy was, to put it mildly, hell. I was sick constantly. The strain on my body was immense, and I had to stop working after just 3 months. I spent more time in the hospital than at home. There was one night, around the 7-month mark, that I still have nightmares about. I woke up struggling to breathe, a crushing weight on my chest. Walter rushed me to the emergency room. The machine started beeping frantically, doctors and nurses were yelling. I remember seeing the terror in Walter's face before everything went blurry. They managed to stabilize me, but I had to stay in the hospital for the rest of the pregnancy. The delivery was even worse. It was a terrifying, near-death experience. There was a moment during labor when my heart began to fail. I remember the panic in the room, the doctor shouting orders. I faded in and out of consciousness. The last thing I remember thinking was, I'm not going to make it. But somehow, I did. I barely survived, and our son, Leo, was born healthy and screaming his little lungs out. Holding him for the first time, all the pain and fear melted away. He was perfect. He was our miracle. But the doctors were very, very clear afterward. My cardiologist sat down with Walter and me in my hospital room. He looked at me with grave eyes and said, "Rachel, you are incredibly lucky. But your heart cannot go through that again. Another pregnancy will kill you." There was no ambiguity in his voice. It wasn't a warning, it was a certainty. Walter and I were just fine with that. We were so happy with our little family. We had each other, our beautiful boy, and a peaceful life. My only contact with my parents and Blair was the occasional, superficial phone call and holiday card. The distance was healing. I thought that chapter of my life was finally closed. I was wrong. It was just the calm before the storm. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was my mother. Her number flashed on the screen, and my stomach immediately clenched. We hadn't spoken in months. "Rachel," she said, her voice oddly cheerful. "Your father and I need to talk to you about something. It's important. Can you and Walter come over this weekend?" I hesitated. Walter, who could read me like a book, saw the look on my face and shook his head slightly. But a part of me, that old, familiar feeling of obligation, took over. I agreed. Against my better judgment, we drove the 2 hours to their house that Saturday. The house was exactly as I remembered it, spotless, cold, and filled with pictures of Blair. Blair's graduation, Blair's soccer trophies, Blair's wedding. There was one small, framed photo of me and Walter on a side table, almost hidden from view. They sat us down in the living room, the same room where I had been lectured and ignored for so many years. The small talk was excruciatingly awkward. Finally, my mother leaned forward and handed me a thick manila envelope. "We wanted to give this to you in person," she said, a strange, hopeful smile on her face. I opened it. Inside wasn't a letter or photos. It was a stack of legal documents. I scanned the first page. My eyes caught the words surrogacy agreement. I felt my blood run cold. It was a contract. They wanted me to be a surrogate for Blair. I looked up, stunned, unable to form words. My father started talking, his voice calm and matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing a business deal. He explained that Blair and her husband had been struggling with infertility. They had been through multiple rounds of IVF with no success. This was their last hope. My parents had already consulted with doctors, their doctors, and lawyers. They had all the paperwork ready. They were presenting it to me as a finished plan, a decision that had already been made. As if I had no say in the matter. I just stared at them. My mind was reeling. You know I can't," I finally stammered. "You know about my heart," the doctors said. I almost died having Leo. They said another pregnancy would kill me. My mother's face crumpled, not with sympathy, but with theatrical tears. "Oh, Rachel, how can you be so selfish?" she sobbed, pulling a handkerchief from her sleeve. "Blair has wanted to be a mother her whole life. This is her only chance. Her heart is broken." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Selfish? They were aware of my medical history. They knew I had a child who needed his mother. They knew they were asking me to risk leaving my son an orphan. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was giving Blair what she wanted. My father chimed in, his voice turning hard. "After everything this family has done for you, we think you owe us this. You owe your sister this." Owe them? What had they done for me? The medical bills they loved to hold over my head were paid by my grandparents. The emotional support I so desperately needed came from Walter and his family. All my parents had ever done was make me feel like I would never be good enough, that I would always be second best to Blair. I stood up, shaking. Walter put a protective arm around me. I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. I just looked at these two people who were supposed to love me, who were calmly and rationally asking me to sign my own death warrant for my sister's sake, and I felt nothing but a profound, hollow emptiness. We walked out of that house, my mother's accusation of selfishness echoing in my ears, and I cried for the entire 2-hour drive home. The days that followed were a nightmare. The moment we got home, Walter was furious. Not just at their request, but at the chilling, absolute disregard for my life. "That's it, Rachel," he said, his voice tight with anger. "We're done. You are never to speak to them again. They have proven, beyond any doubt, that they do not care if you live or die." In my heart, I knew he was right. The request wasn't just unkind, it was cruel. They wanted me to sacrifice my life, to potentially leave my son motherless, all to give Blair what she wanted. But even knowing that, a lifetime of conditioning is hard to shake. The guilt was eating me alive. Am I being selfish? Do I owe them? Is this my one chance to finally prove my worth to them? I knew these thoughts were toxic, a product of their manipulation, but they swirled in my mind relentlessly. I didn't answer their calls. Or their texts. Then, Blair started. At first, her messages were sickly sweet. "Hey, sis, just thinking of you." I know that was a lot to take in. Just remember, family helps family. A few days later, another one, "I would do this for you in a heartbeat if the roles were reversed." That one almost made me laugh. This was the woman who wouldn't even drive me to school if it was slightly out of her way. When her fake kindness didn't work, the messages turned nasty. She sent me an email late one night. I made the mistake of opening it. The subject line was just wow. The email read, "Mom was right about you. You've always only thought about yourself. I guess almost dying during your pregnancy is just a convenient excuse to not help me. Some sister you are." That was a punch to the gut. They weren't just ignoring my near-death experience, they were twisting it, weaponizing it as proof of my selfishness. I felt sick. I tried to do normal things, to focus on Leo and Walter. We went to the park one afternoon. Leo was laughing on the swings, and I should have been happy. But my phone kept buzzing in my pocket. A call from my mom. A text from my dad. Another from Blair. Each buzz was like a little shock of anxiety. I remember trying to push Leo on the swing, and my hands were trembling. The messages from my parents were even worse. My mother called and left long, tearful voicemails about how I was destroying Blair's only chance at happiness. She was painting me as this cold-hearted monster to any relative who would listen. My cousin texted me, "Your mom is really worried about Blair." What's going on? They were turning the whole family against me. They were acting as if Blair's desire for a biological child was more important than my actual, medically documented risk of death. The final straw came from my father. He sent a text that was so cruel, so utterly devoid of love, that it finally shattered any lingering sense of obligation I had. It said, "You have always been a disappointment, but this is a new low. This is how you repay us for giving you life? By denying your sister the experience of motherhood?" I wanted to text back that they didn't give me life, they just didn't prevent it. My grandparents were the ones who paid for the medical care that kept me alive. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the message, and something inside me finally snapped. I showed Walter my father's text message. His face went pale, then red with a rage I had rarely seen. He grabbed his car keys. "I'm going over there," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm going to tell them what I think of them." As satisfying as that sounded, I stopped him. "Walter, no," I said, putting my hand on his arm. "They're not worth it. They're not worth the gas. He looked at me, his anger slowly softening into concern. We sat down at our small kitchen table and had a long, serious talk. This wasn't just about me anymore. Rachel, Walter said, taking my hands in his. This is about our son. What they are asking could make him lose his mother. No one, and I mean no one, has the right to ask you to take that risk. Not for any reason. He was right. Of course, he was right. Looking at my beautiful, innocent son, who needed his mom to be healthy and alive, I felt the last remnants of my guilt dissolve, replaced by a fierce, protective resolve. We decided, together, that we had to take definitive action. That night felt like a strategy session for a war we never wanted to fight. The first step was simple, but powerful. We went through my phone, and one by one, we blocked their numbers. My mom's. My dad's. Blair's. We even blocked a few aunts and uncles who had started sending me guilt-tripping flying monkey messages on their behalf. The only exceptions were my grandparents. The feeling of hitting block on each number was terrifying, but also incredibly liberating. It was a digital door slamming shut. The second step was to seek legal protection. Walter was worried that their increasingly aggressive behavior might lead to something desperate. These people are not rational, Rachel, he said. We need to be prepared. The next day, I made an appointment with a family law attorney. The conversation with the lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davis, was validating. I laid out the whole story, from my childhood to the surrogacy demand and the harassment. She listened patiently, her expression growing more and more grim. What they are doing, she said when I finished, is a form of reproductive coercion. No court would ever enforce such an agreement, especially given your medical history. But we need to get ahead of this. She advised us to document everything, every call, every text, every attempt at contact. She also suggested sending them a formal cease and desist letter. That evening, after taking these concrete steps, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Walter and I cooked dinner together while Leo played on the floor with his blocks. It was a simple, domestic scene, but it felt profound. This was my life, my family. And I would do whatever it took to protect it. The guilt was gone. In its place was a cold, hard certainty. I was a mother, and my first and only duty was to my child, not to the family who had treated me as disposable. I thought blocking their numbers would be the end of it, that we'd finally have some peace. I should have known better. 2 weeks went by in a strange, quiet limbo. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. Every instinct screamed not to answer, but I did. It was my mother. Rachel, we need to talk, she said, her voice strained. Just the two of us. No Walter. A cold dread washed over me, but I agreed to meet her at a local coffee shop. I chose a public place for a reason, and Walter insisted on waiting in the car in the parking lot, just in case. I saw her sitting at a small table by the window as I walked in. She looked older, more tired than I remembered. But any flicker of sympathy I might have felt vanished the moment I sat down. There was no "how are you," no acknowledgement of the years of silence or the recent cruelty. She launched straight into what was clearly a rehearsed speech about Blair. Your sister is devastated, Rachel, she began, stirring her coffee with a clinking sound that grated on my nerves. She's just withering away from the grief of not being able to have children. She pushed a business card across the table. It was for a high-end fertility specialist in the city. The doctors say this is her last chance. This expert says you and Blair are a perfect match for surrogacy. I took a deep breath. Mom, I told you. My own doctors, who have my entire medical history, have forbidden me from getting pregnant again. It's too dangerous. She waved her hand dismissively, as if I were complaining about a minor inconvenience. Oh, doctors are always overly cautious, she said breezily. Blair's specialist says the risks are manageable. They can monitor your heart condition closely. Manageable. The word hung in the air between us. She was talking about my life, my heart, as if it were a variable in an equation that could be managed. The conversation then took an even more sinister turn. She started talking about family legacy, about the importance of carrying on the family line. And then she said it, the words that finally revealed the ugly truth I had known my whole life. Blair deserves to pass on our genes more than you do, Rachel. She's the strong one. The healthy one. She said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly. All those years of feeling like damaged goods, of being the flawed child, it wasn't in my head. It was their truth. I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. It was the peace that comes from finally having your worst fears confirmed. I stood up to leave. Her face twisted into a sneer. I should have known you'd be difficult about this, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You've always been jealous of Blair. This is your chance to finally do something for this family, and you're throwing it away. As I walked out of that coffee shop, leaving her sitting there alone, I didn't feel angry or hurt. I felt free. For the first time, I saw my mother clearly. Not as a parent who had failed to love me enough, but as someone who had never seen me as a person at all. I was just a tool, a means to an end for Blair's benefit. On the drive home, Walter asked how it went. I told him everything. After a long silence, he reached over and took my hand. You know what? He said. They don't deserve you, Rachel. They never have. And I knew he was right. The cease and desist letter our lawyer sent seemed to pour gasoline on the fire. My father, unable to reach me directly, started sending threatening messages from different burner phone numbers. You have broken your mother's heart. There are consequences for your actions. We will not let you destroy this family. Each message was more menacing than the last. Then came the call from my grandmother. Her voice was trembling. Rachel, I overheard your parents talking to an attorney. They're looking for legal ways to force you to do this. She said they were talking about family obligation laws and medical rights. Their plan was apparently to argue in court that my doctors were being overly cautious and that my refusal wasn't based on legitimate medical concerns, but on unresolved family resentment. They were literally planning to sue their own daughter to force her into a life-threatening medical procedure. The audacity of it was breathtaking. It was in that same phone call that my grandmother dropped another piece of information. Blair's husband was completely against this plan. He thought it was insane to risk someone's life, but Blair and my parents had steamrolled him, essentially cutting him out of the conversation. At least there was one sane person in that family. This new threat pushed us into high gear. I immediately contacted my doctor's office and had them put extra security protocols on my medical records. We hired Ms. Davis to represent us officially. She was furious on my behalf. They cannot legally compel you to be a surrogate, she assured me. That's reproductive coercion, and no court in this country would uphold it. But we need to be aggressive. Just as we were preparing our legal defense, the next wave of attack began. My parents launched a smear campaign with our entire extended family. They called a big family get-together, which we obviously weren't invited to. Soon after, the calls from relatives started. My aunt from Texas called me, sobbing about how she had to watch Blair suffer through another failed IVF cycle. They had completely twisted the story. My cousins told me that my parents were telling everyone that my heart condition had significantly improved and that I was just using it as an excuse because I was jealous of Blair's successful life and wanted to see her suffer. My mother's sisters started posting cryptic things on Facebook about selfish family members and the importance of sacrifice. Everyone knew who they were talking about. I felt like I was being buried alive under their lies. The pressure was immense. But then, two small lights appeared in the darkness. First, my cousin Paige, who had grown up seeing the way I was treated, messaged me privately. Rachel, I know what they're doing, she wrote. I remember how they treated you as a kid. They're being insane. Don't you dare let them guilt you into this. Her message was like a lifeline. The second was a secret phone call. Blair's husband, Mark, called Walter late one night. He sounded desperate. He confirmed everything my grandmother had said. He told Walter he was trying to reason with them, but they were so obsessed with their goal they weren't listening to anyone. He was worried they were all going to end up in serious legal trouble. That was it. I was done being the quiet victim. I was done letting them control the narrative. That night, Walter and I sat down and crafted a mass email. We sent it to my entire extended family. It contained no drama, no accusations. It contained only the cold, hard facts, a summary of my heart condition, a direct quote from my cardiologist about the mortal risks of another pregnancy, and a scanned copy of the specialist's official recommendation. I ended it by stating that I would no longer be discussing surrogacy and that any further harassment would be handled by my lawyer. Then, I hit send. It was my truth bomb. After sending that email, I took the final step. With Walter's help, I blocked every single member of my family, with the exception of my grandparents and my cousin Paige. We created new, private social media profiles under a different name, for close friends only. It felt drastic, almost like entering witness protection, but it was also incredibly freeing. The constant buzz of anxiety from my phone was gone. There was just silence. The reaction to the email was, as you might expect, a mixed bag. A few relatives sent apologetic messages to Paige to pass on to me, saying they hadn't known the full medical reality. Most, however, just went silent. They were likely too embarrassed to admit they had been duped or too loyal to my parents to go against them. My mother's final message to me came through my grandmother. My grandma read it to me over the phone, her voice heavy with sadness. "You have let this family down for the last time," my mother had written. "You put your own selfish needs ahead of your sister's happiness. Do not expect to be welcomed back." As I listened to those words, I expected to feel pain. Instead, I felt a tremendous wave of relief. It was a confirmation of everything I had always known. My only value to them was what I could do for Blair. Now that I was useless, I was discarded. The door had finally closed. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. I started sleeping better than I had in years. Walter said he saw a change in me, that I was laughing more freely, smiling more. In this new, drama-free environment, our son Leo was thriving. We started a new family tradition of Sunday board game nights. It was during one of these nights, watching Leo squeal with laughter as he beat Walter at Candyland, that it hit me. This is what family is supposed to feel like. Safe. Loving. Unconditional. My grandmother would visit sometimes, always making sure my parents didn't know. On one visit, she brought a box of old photos she had kept, pictures of me as a baby that I had never seen. Looking at them, I saw a happy little girl, unaware that she would spend decades trying to earn an affection that should have been freely given. I felt a surge of protectiveness for that little girl. I was finally giving her the protection she had always needed from the people who were supposed to provide it. And I was protecting the family I had now, the family I had chosen. About a month after I sent the mass email, just when I thought the story had reached its quiet, sad conclusion, everything exploded. The truth, as they say, has a way of coming out. And it did, in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. It started with a call to my lawyer, Ms. Davis. It was from the legal department of Blair's fertility clinic. They had been conducting an internal review after my parents had made some noise about their uncooperative stance. As part of that review, they requested my official medical records from my cardiologist. What they received was, of course, a stark contrast to the documents my parents had provided them. The clinic's legal team informed Ms. Davis that my parents and Blair had submitted forged medical records, a version that deliberately omitted my severe heart condition and the life-threatening complications of my previous pregnancy. They had committed medical fraud. The clinic was already in the process of filing a formal report. I was stunned. I knew they were manipulative, but I never thought they would stoop to committing an actual crime. But that was only the first domino to fall. The second one came just hours later, and it brought the whole rotten structure crashing down. Blair's husband, Mark, had finally had enough. He went into the extended family group chat, the one I was no longer a part of, and he detonated a truth bomb of his own. Paige sent me screenshots. His message was long and detailed. He revealed how my parents and Blair had conspired to conceal my health condition from the doctors. He disclosed that Blair was fully aware of my near-death experience during my pregnancy but had purposely downplayed it to everyone, including him. He wrote that he could no longer be married to someone who would commit fraud and knowingly endanger her own sister's life for her own desires. The response from the extended family was instantaneous and overwhelming. Suddenly, the aunts and cousins who had been posting cryptic, judgmental messages were silent. My aunt from Texas, the one who had cried to me on the phone, called me, sobbing again, but this time with apologies. She said she had no idea about the medical fraud, that she had been completely manipulated. A number of family members immediately stopped all communication with my parents and Blair, describing their behavior as monstrous and illegal. It was a complete and total reversal. The perfect facade they had spent a lifetime building had shattered in a single afternoon, brought down by their own deceitful actions. If you're still listening to this, I just want to say thank you. If you've been on this journey with me up to this point, please help me out by liking this video and commenting with the number 1 down below. It lets me know that you've given me a like, and it tells me that you're standing with me through all of this. Your support is an incredible encouragement for me. Please, comment with the number 1, and let me tell you what happened next. The fallout was swift and brutal. The perfect family portrait my parents had so carefully curated was ripped to shreds. Mark filed for divorce from Blair the following week. In the filings, he cited the medical fraud and her conspiracy against me as primary reasons. The news spread like wildfire through their social circle. The golden child, the perfect princess, was suddenly at the center of a scandalous and very public divorce. The legal repercussions started to mount. According to my lawyer, my parents and Blair were facing serious consequences for the medical fraud. The fertility clinic, to protect its own reputation, banned them from all of its associated facilities for life. They were also under investigation by the state medical board. I never sought retribution, I only ever wanted to be left alone, but seeing their perfect world crumble because of their own actions, it felt like poetic justice. The social shunning was, perhaps, even more devastating for them. My parents, who cared so much about appearances, were suddenly pariahs. Old family friends stopped calling. They were uninvited from neighborhood gatherings. The family they had manipulated against me had now turned on them. The flying monkeys had flown back to a new roost, one where my parents were the villains. I watched it all from a safe distance, getting updates from Paige and my grandmother. It was surreal. These people who had wielded so much power over my life, who had controlled me through guilt and shame, were now completely powerless. They had spent their lives trying to control everyone around them, and in the end, their obsession with control led to their own self-destruction. They did this to themselves. I was just living my best life, with people who genuinely valued me, far away from the wreckage they had created. Today, my life is quiet. And it is beautiful. The constant knot of anxiety that used to live in my stomach is gone. I wake up in the morning, and the first thing I feel isn't dread, but peace. Walter and I are stronger than ever. Leo is a happy, thriving 7-year-old who knows nothing of this drama, only that he is loved fiercely by his parents. My relationship with my grandparents and Paige is closer than ever. They are my family. They, along with Walter's incredible family, have shown me what true, unconditional love looks like. It isn't about what you can do for someone, it's about loving them for who they are. I sometimes think about Blair and my parents. I don't feel anger anymore, just a kind of sad pity. They had a daughter who, despite everything, would have loved them if they had only let her. But they couldn't see past their own ambitions, their own obsession with perfection. I heard through my grandmother that Blair never remarried and that my parents have become reclusive and bitter. Their perfect story had a very ugly ending. To anyone out there watching this, to anyone who has ever been made to feel like they are not enough, that their needs don't matter, that they are the problem in a toxic family, please hear me. It is not selfish to protect yourself. It is not selfish to draw a line in the sand and say no more. Your health, both mental and physical, is important. Your life has value. Walking away from people who don't love you enough to respect your life can be the bravest and most loving thing you can ever do for yourself. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my story. Your support, your comments, your simple act of being here has been more helpful than you can ever know. It showed me that I'm not alone. And I hope, in some small way, my story can do the same for you.